We've already ranked every first and second place song in Eurovision since the year 2000. Now we're going to complete the set by ranking every last place. This one was considerably more difficult to put myself through than the previous two in this series, and to be honest, the fact I was ill while writing this script didn't help either. By the way, sorry in advance if you can still hear in my voice, my cold hasn't completely passed yet. To be honest, I think talking about these songs is not going to help. In any case, before I do that anyway, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you enjoy it. You can follow me and my editor Jay on various social medias. All the details are in the description. We have a Discord server that you can join, and the link for that is there too. If you want to support us financially, you can help us on Patreon. The link for that is in the description as well. Now we've got that out the way, let's get to the first one, which will today be 2010. Josh Dubovy from the United Kingdom with his song, That Sounds Good to Me.
You bring the sunshine, I'll bring the good times.
If this is where we're starting, this is going to be a really long video. We've talked about this song in this channel before, so let me say this now. Before I talk about how awful this song is, none of it was Josh's fault. To be honest, he was just about the only person who was trying to do his job well. This song was written and produced by Mike Stock and Pete Waterman. Their last #1 hit single in the UK was in 1990. That's 20 years before the contest. It wouldn't surprise me if this steaming garbage pile of a piece of music had been sat in a drawer in one of their houses somewhere for the duration of that time, because that's the kind of era that it feels like it's come from. This is grating and generic, and it is totally devoid of any kind of substance. What turned this from a nothing burger to a complete disaster, though, was the way in which Stock and Waterman threw Josh under the bus at the last minute. They hiked the key of the song up into one that Josh simply couldn't sing in. As a result, the big note at the end of the song was out of his range, and then this happened. I actually really feel for Josh as someone who was a complete newcomer to the music industry. It's gonna be really hard in that situation as someone with no experience sitting in a room with a pair of producers who may be out of date but have produced dozens of hit singles over the years. That said, that one decision meant this was doomed from the start and never had any chance of success at Eurovision. Combine that with the fact that the live mixing at the contest was so bad that the backing singers just kind of sounded like banshees.
I'm gonna see it through now.
And you ended up with a true disaster that richly deserved the last place finish it got. Despite the fact this was not Josh's fault, this is going into F tier. We're starting this video as we mean to go on. You simply cannot present a song as terrible as this and expect it to go anywhere else. Anyway, with that out the way, we've got one of the worst ones out straight out of the bag, so I'm sure the next one will be much better. Oh, it's fucking Gemini. Oh, Jesus Christ.
Bye bye, baby. Lie to me, baby. Must have been crazy, baby. Bye bye. Rock my baby.
Continuing on my country's run of awful atrocities in the contest, Gemini in 2003 dropped one of the most diabolically awful performances in the contest's history. This song is so bad it's tantamount to a breach of international law, the second one that the UK had committed in 2003 in just a few months. The difference with this one is all ours. We can't blame the Americans for this one at all. There was nothing theoretically very wrong with this piece of pretty down the line schlager in the studio version. It still didn't sound great, but it was passable. And more importantly, it was in tune. It was not a good song by any stretch, but it might have managed to get a few points from our friends of the era, such as Ireland or Malta. Then the night of the contest rolled around, and my God, it was awful. This wasn't just slightly out of tune, it was miles out. I must have watched this performance 15 or 20 times over the years, and it still makes me cringe just as much now. As the disaster rolls on, you sort of hope that maybe they'll get it together, and maybe it's just the first singer who's out of tune. Unfortunately, this was not the case, and a second out of tune disaster hits the song in the second verse.
You're living a lie. You'll take the fight.
At the very least, Gemma here bothered to dress up for the occasion. Meanwhile, Chris, who presumably was still lost in the same episode that had convinced him he was able to sing, showed up in a tacky white t-shirt with one sleeve up and one sleeve down. The icing on the shit cake here is that the UK's commentator at the time, Terry Wogan, suggested that we had done so badly because of international backlash surrounding the Iraq war. No, Terry, it was just awful. This is, once again, in F tier. I seriously hate it that I had to remind myself of this song for this video. Let's move on and try to never speak of this again. Next up in this list is 2005 and Germany. Gracia was their entry with their song Run and Hide.
You better run and hide. And then you get to cry. Oh, no, no, cry.
This is Germany's earliest entry onto this list, but it's far from the last one. One thing it did have was that it was instantly memorable on the night from the very first second, thanks to whatever this note was. Unfortunately, things kind of went even further south from there. This reminds me a lot of the Avril Lavigne-style pop rock of the mid-2000s, and that's actually a genre of music that I'm really fond of. Unfortunately for Gracia, that is where the comparisons end, because unlike her, Avril Lavigne can actually sing. The choruses of this in particular are particularly horrific. And in those choruses, we are far closer to drunk British tourists attempting karaoke in Benidorm than we are to a Eurovision performance. Like, I seriously think something must have gone wrong, because I cannot get over just how terrible the vocals in this song are. It's so blatantly obvious that she had zero chance of being able to sing this song, and yet for some reason, nobody at any point turned around and said, hold on, maybe we should reconsider this. This literally participated in a live national selection that year. Granted, the vocals were a little better there, but they were still terrible, and you could tell she couldn't sing the song. How did thousands of people watch this on live TV and go, yeah, that sounds like a great choice? I know it's been a really bad start to this video, but we have to put this one in F tier as well. This is just yet another piece of proof as to why the German public should never be allowed to have any say in the selection of their Eurovision entry ever. Things do get a little bit better with the next entry. 2006 was Malta and Fabrizio Faniello with his song I Do.
I won't give you up, I will never stop. I got a piece of your heart, I can get enough. 'Cause I do.
Gracia may have been singing awful Benidorm-style karaoke like a British tourist, but luckily the travel company has a solution. They've hired Fabrizio to take to the stage and raise the spirits. Luckily, the audience is so drunk that they will barely notice that either he or his mid-tempo, pretty down-the-line Europop is even there. I shouldn't be too harsh on this, given that it commits a relatively low number of crimes compared to other Eurovision last places of this era. But as a more general point, I really despair at the quality of Eurovision songs in the early to mid-2000s. I know I'm going to have a bias here because this was before I was really engaged with the contest, but the quality of a lot of these songs was simply diabolical. The lack of semi-finals are going to mean as well that the very worst songs at this time in the final are worse than they are in more recent years. You will notice that borne out over this tier list as well, as more of the more recent songs do better. None of that takes away from the fact that going through some of these early year songs has been like a Kafkaesque horror. With all that said, Fabrizio does manage to escape the deep depths of the songs we've talked about so far. The song is performed reasonably well. The vocals are not great, but they're not bad either. An attempt was at least made when it came to the choreography, although there are some oddities about this as well. I'm going to presume that Fabrizio wasn't able to hit the big notes because for some reason in the final chorus, the backing singer is doing it instead.
Never stop. I got a piece of your heart, I can get enough. 'Cause I do.
In addition to that, the natural limiting factor of this song being about as interesting as a piece of cardboard limits it from going too high. But on the basis of how bad things have been so far, and on the basis that I don't hate this, I'm going to put it in C tier as an act of generosity. Let's move on before I change my mind. It's straight back to hell now as we go to 2001, Norway, with Haldor Lagrad with his song On My Own. First things first, Haldor, please stop staring at me like that. Seriously, please, you're making me uncomfortable. Secondly, shout out to this backing singer who is clearly extremely focused. She is as ready to deliver 3 minutes of mediocrity as a university sports boy after 11 pints. I'll try to be positive firstly, although there's not that much positive to say. Haldor objectively has a really great voice, and he shows it off well in this performance. Unfortunately, that's where my praise both starts and ends. I don't know how big a fan Haldor is of Celine Dion or Eric Carmen, but this is very obviously a complete rip-off of the song All By Myself. Right down to the name of the song literally being a synonym of All By Myself. It's the kind of derivative slop that was absolutely everywhere in Eurovision in the 2000s, and it's one of the trends about the contest that even now irritates me the most. Throw in the standard early 2000s key change, and the fact that the song is so bland that it practically sends you to sleep. It's like this was tailor-made to be as irritating to me as possible. Secondly, and I know I joked about this already, but the way Haldor stares into the camera is really off-putting. When the camera camera is close in, he does not break eye contact for a moment, and it just feels weird. If it weren't for the fact that this is an obvious ripoff of something else, I would consider sparing Haldor the ultimate fate. Unfortunately, because it so clearly is a ripoff, this has to go in F tier. I promise you, there are better things to come. We will have some songs that actually go above C tier. Unfortunately, that time will not be now, because now we're talking about 2007. Ireland. Dervish with the song They Can't Stop the Spring.
They might scare the blackbird, but they cannot stop and sing. They may steal the honey.
I don't know if Dervish were asleep through the 1990s and early 2000s, but opening the song with "The curtain has been raised, the wall no longer stands" was a bit out of date by 2007. That was far from the only thing wrong with this either. Drawing on traditional Irish music does have a track record of success in the contest. Riverdance was still not that long ago in 2007, at least compared to the fall of the Berlin Wall, and Ireland had won with Emma Quinn and The Voice in the 90s with a song that really heavily relied on traditional elements. With that in mind, it's a genuine feat to produce something as underwhelming as this. This was always starting off as a pretty weak example of how to mobilize this kind of cultural heritage in the contest. Unfortunately, things got worse once the contest actually rolled around. Given that it's essentially the theme of the video at this point, it won't surprise you to know that the live vocal for this was absolutely terrible. That wasn't the only thing that this vocalist got wrong either. As a general rule, if your vocalist doesn't know what to do with their hands, just give them a microphone to hold so they don't have to think about it. Otherwise, you end up with a situation like this one where she's just kind of waving them around and wobbling back and forth. The logic of this is that it means she's able to play the bodhrán later in the performance. If you're wondering what that is, it's one of these. But this could have easily been avoided if they had just, I don't know, put a mic stand on stage instead. On the basis that this does have some unique elements to it, and the instrumental is kind of quite nice and warm, I'm going to put this in C tier, despite the best efforts of the terrible vocal to drag it down. It's a German double-header now, starting with 2022. Malik Harris with his song Rockstars.
We used to be the rock stars. We never thought it'd go high until this thing we call lifestyle.
We're going to talk about the German entries in 2015 and 2016 later, and this one has a lot of the same problems as those. The only difference is I think this one is actually even more boring than them. I just don't really understand the logic of sending a song like this to Eurovision. It might go down well on a drive time radio show, but it's so obviously going to get lost around much more impressive and much more dramatic performances on the Eurovision stage. I'll give Malik some credit for the rap verse, which at least is trying to do something a little bit different. But when your song is a dull piano 4-chord ballad, this doesn't really land at all. You end up with something that is unfortunately more likely to send you to sleep than get you to pick up your phone and vote for it. There is nothing I actively dislike about this, so I'm still going to put it in C tier. It feels a little harsh to go any lower, but this is exactly the kind of song that you should avoid sending to Eurovision at all costs. The second half of this German doubleheader, luckily, is much better, and by far the best song in this video so far. That's 2023. Lord of the Lost with their song Blood and Glitter.
Blood and glitter, sweet and bitter. We're so happy we could die.
2023 is probably the only time that Germany learned the right lessons from doing badly at Eurovision. They responded in exactly the right way to their underwhelming result in 2022 by immediately thinking way out of the box. This is a song and a band that are genuine quality and that have since toured with Iron Maiden. They have some serious stage presence as well. All of this makes me wonder how on earth they still ended up getting onto this list. I really can't find any fault with this entry. It was staged in a way that suited the band. The vocals were on point, and the song itself is a banger. In addition, the growls that Chris Harms does, while not for everyone, were extremely impressive. And he did specific, extremely technically difficult growls during the jury shows. It's an indictment of the lack of professionalism of the juries that they failed to pick up on this at all. They awarded this only 3 points in total. I am going to make excuses for this because it deserved much better and it was definitely robbed. I think the key factor here, unfortunately, was totally out of Lord of the Lost's control. That was the dominance of the two front-running entries in the contest in 2023. Carrier vacuumed up all of the voters that this song would have appealed to. And given the narrative before the show that it was Loreen or Carrier for the win and that no one else really had a chance, it's no surprise that voters decided to cluster and vote more tactically than they usually would. That sadly means that songs like this one ended up losing out. This one is going into A tier for me. This is one of the entries that has no business being on this list. In any other scenario other than the one in 2023, it probably wouldn't have been. We're jumping back a bit now to 2008. Andy Abraham from the UK with his song Even If.
Even if the sun stops rising, I still wanna wake up with you.
This one is going to be a controversial one. This song slaps, and I refuse to acknowledge any other opinion. I know every word to this song. I have danced around this living room singing this song probably several times in the last year alone, and I would like to thank Ireland and San Marino for being the only countries with good enough taste to give us any points for this. I honestly think I just have a soft spot for really shitty disco, because it's no coincidence that I love both this and also Everybody by Dave Benton and Tanel Padar. There's just something about it that charms me, and I don't know why. Without meaning to make too many excuses for this, the fact it performed second in the running order in an era that was 100% televote, with the exception of San Marino, probably made it a lot more difficult than it was already going to be for Andy. Even then though, I have to admit that no matter how much I love this, it was never going to do well in the contest. I love disco, but this is objectively not very good disco. And between that and spending about 20p on the staging, we pretty much sealed our fate from the off. Putting this in B tier will probably cause most of you to lose whatever remaining faith you have in my judgment, but I'm going to do it anyway. Even though this is a disaster, it's my disaster, and it's a disaster that I am going to continue to love. Next up is yet another song from Germany, 2015, Anne-Sophie with her song Black Smoke.
'Cause you say you never let me go, and I said I care, but now we know that it's too hard to say 3 words.
This song barely made it onto this list because Austria also got 0 points in 2015. Performing later in this show gives this song the dubious honour of being the only Eurovision song in history to finish 27th in the grand final. Black Smoke had a difficult start in life. Anne-Sophie actually finished second in the German national selection that year, and this song lost by 79% to 21% in the final round, only for the winner of the show to refuse the victory live on stage and give the ticket to the contest to Anne-Sophie instead. Arriving in that manner isn't exactly the most ringing endorsement of your chances in the contest, and unfortunately that was about as good as it got. As I said before, this song got a grand total of 0 points on the night. This may be controversial, as I know there are still a lot of fans out there for this song, but I think it got pretty much what it deserved. It lost the selection for a reason. The main problem I have with this is that the choruses are just so shouty. I feel like I'm being yelled at. This also feels like yet another example of a Eurovision song that just isn't totally authentic. It tries to mimic that soul and soul-adjacent sound that regained a lot of popularity in the late 2000s and in the 2010s. But unfortunately, it just doesn't quite sell it. You're inevitably going to be compared to the giants of the genre when you perform a song in this style, and it just didn't stack up. The other problem here could simply be that people were apathetic towards it. The song is fine overall, I guess. As I say, I don't have any deep underlying problem with it, but in many ways, that's kind of the problem. It's just fine. No one's going to dislike it, but no one's going to particularly like it either. It's nobody's favourite, and nobody is picking up the phone to vote for it. On the basis that I have basically 0 strong feelings about it, it can't go anywhere above or below C tier, so that is where I'm going to put it. 2002 is next, and that's Denmark, Malene with her song Tell Me Who You Are.
Tell me who you are, show me what to do, let me be the one that you hold on to.
Malene, in a virtuosic bout of originality in music, is singing a mid-tempo ballad about strife in a relationship. This has never been done before or since. In the process, she also dropped an all-timer of bad English lyrics in the contest with the line, "I'm afraid for day to begin." Perhaps the most damning thing I can say about this performance is actually the words of the composer of the song. He writes under the stage Michael Ronson, but he's actually a Romanian producer called Mircea Romcescu. This might explain why some of the lyrics were in slightly broken English. He reposted this performance to YouTube on his own YouTube channel with the comment, "Not the best performance from the singer, a little weak on charisma and self-confidence, maybe too heavy burden for her." The sad thing thing is here is that he's completely right. Mr. Ronson hardly did Malene a favour by giving her a pretty nothing burger song that couldn't have been elevated all that much, no matter who the singer was. Unfortunately though, this performance was extremely wooden, and her stage presence was really poor. It takes quite something to stand on a tiny B stage by yourself and somehow still get lost in it. Malene has to go into D tier for me because it's just not a good song, and it's not a good performance either. The fact that there's nothing actively awful about it keeps it out of F tier, but only by the skin of its teeth. Essentially what I'm saying is, it's a D-. While we're talking about terrible mid-tempo ballads, let's talk about 2019. The UK, yet again, Michael Rice with his song Bigger Than Us.
It's bigger than us. It's bigger than you and me. It's bigger than us.
Michael Rice has a really great voice, and I have actually met and interviewed him. He is one of the kindest people I have met in the Eurovision bubble. It's such a shame that despite all that vocal talent, he was given this formless ball of mush.
It's bigger than us. It's bigger than you and me.
It's such a shame that that vocal talent was wasted with this grey, formless mush of a song. And the result was of no surprise to anyone. There was no way anybody could have sold this song. Bigger Than Us is so generic as a ballad that it feels like we actively went out of our way to produce the single most middle of the road, most dull, most nothing burger song in the history of the contest. Then, having royally screwed Michael with this terrible song long before a note was sung on the actual Eurovision stage, we completely phoned it in with the staging, consisting of Michael alone and still on a massive empty stage for the first minute, before taking a short toddle to the side in the second, before finishing with a cliche key change, and Michael standing in a circle with his backing singers. Revolutionary. Somewhere at the BBC, somebody thought this was a good idea. I hope they know what they did. This was a disaster in every single department except for Michael's vocals. Those are the only thing keeping it off of rock bottom, so it's going into D tier for me. 2012 is next, and it's Norway. 2G with his song Stay.
I don't know what I'm doing tonight, but this rush is making me stronger.
We have Erik Saade at home. He's Norwegian and almost manages to sing in tune, but not quite. Seriously though, I maybe didn't appreciate it back at the time because I was really young in 2012, but this is so stylistically similar to Popular by Erik Saade. That probably has a lot to do with the fact that both Stay and Erik Saade's song Popular were both produced by the same producer. That does mean that this song is a pop banger, and it also means it had pretty high hopes for the contest. This finished high up in fan polls, and the odds had it on for a good finish as well. When we saw the live show and the vocals were this bad though, I think the result was probably not as surprising as we would have thought beforehand. For large parts of this, 2G is towing the line between singing and shouting. It doesn't make it any less fun, but it's definitely off-putting. And I'm not surprised that the scores suffered as a result. I like the studio version of this song a lot, and had he delivered an in-tune performance on the night, I don't doubt he would have finished much higher up the scoreboard. On the basis that I do really enjoy this song, and I still listen to it from time to time now, I'm going to put it in B tier. It could have been higher, but that would require a few more notes to be sung in tune. Although, obviously, had he sung a few more notes in tune, he wouldn't be on this list. Staying in Norway, we're now talking about 2004, Knut Anders Sørum with his song High. This song is so bad that Knut had to change his name to Owen Wilson and start a new life after the contest. Seriously though, this song is just really odd musically. At the start of the chorus, for some reason, the key shifts up by a semitone. But then shifts back down again for the verses. Key changes can be made to feel natural, but this one just doesn't at all. And as a result, the whole song feels weird and jarring. It then goes up an additional key change in the final chorus because this is the early 2000s, and of course it does. But by then, you've long since been lost. Given how out of place these key changes are, I can't help but feel that maybe they realised the song wasn't very good and jammed them in at the last minute in a cheap attempt to try and elevate it. Unfortunately, instead of enhancing the song, it just makes it feel like two completely separate nothing burgers that have been jammed together into some kind of nothing Frankenburger. This one is also going into F tier because on the most basic level, you have failed to produce a coherent piece of music. It just makes no sense and it makes me angry. Now we're going to 2018, which was Portugal, Claudia Pascal with her song O Jardim.
So much water is a meal without.
I really wish that this song wasn't on this list. To be honest, this one still hurts. O Jardim is a really sweet, tender ballad with a kind of unusual instrumentation for a song in the contest in this style. Personally, I loved that unique sound that it brought, and while it was never likely to get high up in the scoreboard, I at least thought it would be appreciated enough to get well clear of the bottom and maybe make it to the high teens. Turns out, I'm completely out of touch, and that was completely wrong. Portugal has always gone its own way in Eurovision, and sometimes that has worked really well. Just 1 year before this, Salvador Sobral had won the contest with a record point score by doing the exact same thing of going his own way that Claudio was encouraged to do in 2018. Unfortunately, that approach leaves you exposed to the risk that people might not get it at all. This isn't the only time we've seen this because the same thing happened to Telemoveixe the following year. At the same time, in Claudia's defense, 39 points is an unusually high score for a last place finisher. It was only another 7 points off surviving from making it to this list and finishing in 25th. Luckily, Claudia was undeterred by this and she has tried to come back to Eurovision since, but not successfully as of yet. I always love seeing new artists in the contest, and generally I always prefer a new artist over a returnee, but it feels like she has unfinished business here, and it feels like she needs an opportunity to get the result that she deserves. I look back on this so fondly. Seeing it live was really special, and I'm going to put it into A tier. It misses out on S tier by only a really thin margin for me. Going backwards again, it's now time for 2011, Switzerland with Anna Rossinelli. Her song was In Love for a While.
I love everything about you. I couldn't do without you.
I was a real sucker for this kind of schmaltzy ukulele ballad song in 2011, and while that's not the case as much these days, this song still gives me at least some of the good feelings that it gave me back then. There is genuine warmth in this, and while you've heard a lot of songs like this before, and in fact in the contest, we've heard it since with songs like Leonora's Love Is Forever, it is genuinely enjoyable. There's more than a little bad luck about this result too, because 2011 had some of the weirdest results in the history of the contest. Had this been under the new system since 2016, where jury votes and televotes are counted separately, this would have scored 55 points, which would have been more than enough to lift it well clear of the bottom in every single year since that system was introduced. Unfortunately, with how uniquely widespread the points were in 2011, this is the only year in recent history where that score was not good enough. That said, while luck was a factor, there were some things that could have been done better. The staging was really cold in my opinion and didn't reflect the warmth of the song that was being sung. Looking at Love Is Forever again, which did do a little better than this, the big props actually really helped, and you do wonder whether the same thing could have helped Anna in 2011 too. That would have been especially important given that 2011 took place in that ridiculous Dusseldorf mega arena with like 50,000 people. There was a disconnect between this song and the room it was being sung in, and in a post-2013 Eurovision environment, you can't help but feel it would have done better. I'm going to put this one in B tier. It's a nice song, sung well, with a few key things that just didn't quite line up on the night. Some of them could be controlled, and some of them were just plain bad luck. Staying in the early 2010s, it's another Irish entry, Ryan Dolan with his song Only Love Survives.
So be loved.
This is another example of Ireland leaning into folk elements for its Eurovision entries. This one was a little more successful than some of the non-qualifications that surrounded it, but it was also lighter on the traditional elements than, for example, You Can't Stop the Spring, which we talked about earlier. This pretty quickly transitions into a bog standard dance track once the intro is out of the way. That said, the shirtless men playing the drums who opened this performance are visible and on screen for most of the show, so at least you know that Ryan knows his audience. You can definitely accuse this song of being generic, and while it's nice that they tried to include some of these elements, they got such low prominence for so much of the song that they just get drowned out, and for the most part people are going to forget that they were even there. I will admit though, I still, despite that, don't know how it ended up last. I feel it's my duty to remind you that this is the same year that the weird Lithuanian guy came on stage and sung about his shoes, which were named Hope and Pain or Spain. I'll let you judge for yourself.
Because
of my shoes I'm wearing today. One is called love, the other is fame.
There is no way you can justify anything finishing behind that. It's going to be C tier for Ryan today. It's a solid, albeit uninspiring effort, but he was genuinely unfortunate to be in this position. He sung the song well on the night and things just didn't quite work out. Sadly for Ireland at Eurovision, in this era, they never really seemed to. We're moving forward to 2014 now, and that is Twin from France with their song Moustache. I love this song and I listened to it non-stop in the run-up to the contest in 2014. So it's a shame really that the live performance was a total disaster. More on that in a second. I was in a really weird headspace in 2014 where, for whatever reason, I really needed a silly pop song in French about a guy wanting to have a mustache. I was unhealthily obsessed with this in the run-up to the contest, and I challenge anyone to deny at the very least that this isn't catchy as hell. Unfortunately, there is a big but here. That is once again the live performance. The nature of the backing vocals in the studio version of this track meant that it was always going to be really difficult to transfer over the same feeling to the live performance. Sadly, in this case, it just didn't work, and it's especially ropey during the pre-chorus. It was just messy, and that wasn't helped by the fact that they were all jumping around the stage while singing this song. They just didn't have the breath control for it. All of this in mind, this definitely feels like it falls into the category of beloved disaster bop rather than just disaster. And in turn, I'm going to look back on it fondly. It's going into B tier for that reason. Going forward another 2 years now, we're back to Germany, this time with Jamie Lee and her song Ghost.
This is the ghost of you, haunting the ghost of me.
When you're putting in efforts like this, it's really no surprise that you're coming last in the contest. That said, I will firstly start with the positives. I actually really love the totally deranged energy of what she is wearing on her head. Like, there's something I respect about emptying an entire drawer of headpieces and wearing them all at once. In all seriousness here, I actually think there is some genuine praise to be given for not toning yourself down for the big stage, as many Eurovision artists do. While the fashion choices were interesting, the fact that even at such a young age, she wouldn't be intimidated into changing them says a lot about her, and I really respect that. Unfortunately, I've now gone as long as possible without actually talking about the song, and that is because it's just really dull. I have so little to say about it because nothing happens. It's there for 3 minutes, it goes away again, and then you forget it ever happened. This will probably send you asleep by the end, so it's just as well that Jamie has very considerately thrown in a out-of-the-blue big note into the final chorus that doesn't fit at all.
Tell me who's scared now.
It bears zero relation to the rest of the song, but if you fall asleep at your TV, it'll definitely wake you up. Sadly, this suffers the same problem that Anne-Sophie did the year before. It's fine, but it's dull. No one loves it, no one hates it. It's just fine. That is an absolute death blow in Eurovision, and for that reason, it's no surprise that this came in last place. For today, it's ending up in the same place as Anne-Sophie as well, in C tier. From 2016 to 2017 now, and Spain. Manel Navarro with his song, Do It For Your Lover.
Do it for your lover, do it for your lover, baby. Clap your hands and do it for your lover, do it for your lover, do it for your lover, baby.
When I first heard this song, I actually thought someone was pulling my leg. Like, I didn't actually think it was a Eurovision entry. I moved on with my evening, safe in the assumption that I'd later hear the actual Spanish entry, but unfortunately that entry never came because this was terrifyingly real. I think what strikes me about this is just how spectacularly low effort it is. I seriously don't think more than 20 to 30 minutes went into the production, writing, recording, everything of this song. Then Manel somehow stumbles into the national selection, wins on the back of a massive jury vote, which he won incidentally by just enough to tie for first place, but then win on a tiebreaker that gave primacy to juries over the public, and then make his way with absolutely zero fucks given to the Eurovision stage. At least because of all that, we get this one truly memorable moment, and you all know what's coming already.
Just do it for your lover. Do it for your lover.
Obviously, this is going into F tier. Like, there's absolutely zero doubt. It cannot go anywhere else. But I am genuinely just in awe of how much of a disaster this is. It's not just the height of pure, unadulterated farce of every element of this performance. It's the sheer lack of one single fuck that Manel gave at any stage in the process. That kind of mastery will never ever be repeated. We're moving on now to 2009 and Finland, Waldo's People with their song Lose Control.
I don't wanna lose control. so bad falling. I just can't believe it.
This is the kind of thing that made me fall in love with Eurovision. A middle-aged man dropping some questionable quality rap in broken English? Check. Totally out of place fire-based staging? Check. Badly dressed women singing a Cascada-esque Europop banger chorus? Check. 10 out of 10, no notes. This song is just absolute joy for me. I really need some water. The icing on the cake for this one has to be that it got nowhere near qualifying, but thanks to the bizarre backup jury wildcard qualifier rule that existed at the time, this was parachuted from 13th in the semi-final, a long way from 10th, into the final lineup. That said, this is a song that I really don't understand how it ended up in last place. Sure, it's naff, but so is most of Eurovision in this period. And the performance was pretty good, at least by the standards of Eurovision in the late 2000s. It's catchy, it's fun, and they performed 24th on the night that should have given them plenty of exposure to the public. For whatever reason, it simply didn't land, and they did terribly. I genuinely think I am far from the only Eurovision fan who looks back on this one really fondly. Because of that, I think where I'm putting this on this tier list is going to be pretty popular too, and that is in A tier. This was exactly the tonic I needed after suffering through the early 2000s while writing the script for this video. We have 3 entries left to go, and 3 is actually 3 more points than how many the next entry got. That's James Newman from the UK with his song Embers.
Out of the embers, you and I gonna light up the room. Light up the room.
I think this one might be the entry that has given me more trauma related to Eurovision than any other song in the contest ever. We managed to get literally every single thing wrong and then achieve the nigh on impossible feat of receiving 0 from both the public and the juries on the night. This in a system that was designed to make that virtually impossible. We scaled the heights of abject failure at Eurovision in a glorious way that had never been done before or since with this. There are no redeeming features here, so I'm just going to do a whistle-stop tour of everything that was terrible and then move on. Firstly, and God love him for trying, and he took the result well, but James Newman's live vocals are terrible and his charisma on stage is practically non-existent. Secondly, the song itself is utterly dire. Thirdly, those trumpets are an utter abomination of a stage prop. And what makes it worse is I have it on good authority that those things were expensive. At least we've now learned that you cannot send a Love Island style backing track to Eurovision and expect to do well. And we were shocked out of our slumber a little bit by just how awful this was. But I really don't understand why we chose to inflict this both on ourselves and on the rest of Europe. It's going into F tier. We have only the oldest and newest songs on this list remaining now, and the first one is 2000, Belgium. Natalie Source with her song Envie de Vivre.
L'envie de vivre, oh, restera gravée.
Unfortunately, some last place songs are just incredibly dull, and this is one of them. Natalie took to the stage with an extremely uninteresting gospel song. And for whatever reason, she took to the stage wearing the bedsheet that your dad has been using without washing in the 18 months since the divorce. This performance has also been permanently tainted for me, thanks to the person in the comments that pointed out that Natalie kind of looks like the person who threw water at Louis Walsh on The X Factor.
Je ne peux survivre dans un monde sans amour.
You're not very good.
In all seriousness, this song is in a gospel style, and the first thing I think of when I think of gospel is amazing vocals. Unfortunately, Natalie is pretty far off in this respect. It starts off passable, but the further you get through the song, the more strained and the more shouty it gets. I had never heard this song before I listened to it for this video, and having had to listen to it several times, I think I've heard it more than any person ever should. I'm going to put it into D tier, and I hope I never have to hear it again. Finally, it's 2024, Norway, Gorta with their song Ulveham. We've saved the best till last because 2024 gave us the biggest last place robbery in the recent history of the contest. This song and this performance were utterly magical, to the point that I was far from the only one seeing this as a potential winner in the run-up to the contest. At the absolute worst, I saw it coming maybe somewhere between 11th and 15th. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, it fared terribly with both the juries and the public. With the public, I've kind of rationalized it now because I guess it's quite inaccessible, it's in a language that nobody understands, and it's a very unusual vocal style that some people might be turned off by. What is indefensible is the score that the juries gave to this. For a performance as captivating and as technically challenging and well staged as this one, 12 points from the juries is beyond ridiculous. I seriously don't understand how a set of supposed professionals who are meant to be marking objectively could spurn this song in this way. It's going to take me a while to get over the fact that I even have to put this song in this video, because there is nobody in recent history that deserves this less than Gore to do. Since they're here, the very least I can do is put them in S tier, because that's where they belong. I am really deeply sad that they got so much less than they deserved. With that, we have now suffered our way through every single last place entry since 2000. I am probably traumatized by this, so in return, it would be very, very nice if you could like the video and subscribe to the channel. Like I said, socials are in the description as well. I am really glad to be back making videos this week. I hated taking last week off, but I just could not speak. I completely lost my voice and had a terrible cold. We are going to keep going with the weekly schedule. It's giving me loads of energy and I'm really enjoying it at the moment. So I will see you again in 7 days. Until then, thank you so much for watching and take care.